They didn't leave because you made love feel calm. They stayed because calm was something they didn't know they were allowed to want. In a world that teaches people to confuse intensity with depth and chaos with passion, you became something unfamiliar. You became a place where their nervous system could finally rest. And that kind of love doesn't shout to be noticed. It whispers, and yet it changes everything. You didn't love them with games or uncertainty. You didn't keep them guessing where they stood or whether tomorrow would feel different from today. You didn't use silence as a weapon or affection as a reward. You showed up with the same heart on easy days and hard ones. You were steady. You were present. You were real. And while some people think love needs to feel like a storm to be meaningful, the truth is that storms exhaust the soul. Calm is what heals it. They didn't leave because your love was predictable. They stayed because it was safe. Safe doesn't mean boring. Safe means they didn't have to armor up before talking to you. Safe means they didn't rehearse their words in fear of being misunderstood. Safe means their flaws weren't constantly on trial. With you, they didn't feel like they were walking on emotional glass. They could breathe. They could be human. They could exist without performing. You made love feel like coming home instead of proving something. And for someone who has spent their life running, home can be terrifying at first. Calm exposes what chaos hides. When things slow down, emotions rise to the surface. Old wounds speak up. Unhealed parts ask to be seen. You didn't distract them from themselves, you gently introduced them back to who they really were. That kind of love doesn't trap people. It frees them. They didn't stay because you were perfect. They stayed because you were honest. You didn't pretend to have all the answers. You didn't promise a flawless future. You simply offered truth, effort, and consistency. You chose communication over control. You chose patience over pressure. You chose kindness even when it would have been easier to react. And that consistency taught them something powerful. Love doesn't have to hurt to be real. Your love didn't arrive like fireworks, it arrived like sunrise. Quiet. Gradual. Certain. Every day a little warmer, a little brighter, until one day they realized the darkness wasn't ruling them anymore. You didn't rush them. You didn't demand their healing happen on your timeline. You walked beside them, not ahead of them, not dragging them behind. You understood that growth is not loud. It's gentle. It's repetitive. It's choosing each other even when nothing dramatic is happening. They didn't leave because you asked for respect. They stayed because you modeled it. You respected their boundaries. Their past, their pace. You didn't weaponize their vulnerabilities. You protected what they trusted you with. In your presence, they didn't feel like they had to hide the messy parts. You saw them clearly and didn't flinch. That kind of acceptance changes how a person sees themselves. It teaches them they are not too much, not difficult, not unlovable. You made love feel calm by being emotionally available. You listened not just to respond, but to understand. You paid attention to what they didn't say. You noticed shifts in tone, energy, silence. You didn't minimize their feelings or compare their pain to someone else's. You validated their experiences without trying to fix them immediately. Sometimes, all someone needs is to be held in understanding. You gave that freely. They didn't stay because you made grand gestures. They stayed because you showed up in small, consistent ways. Checking in. Remembering details. Keeping your word. Being reliable when it mattered most. You understood that love is built in moments that don't make it to social media. Love is built in ordinary days, in shared routines, in quiet conversations at the end of long evenings. You made those moments meaningful. You didn't love them with urgency, you loved them with intention. You weren't trying to fill a void or escape loneliness. You chose them from a grounded place. And that grounded energy invited them to soften. Around you, they didn't feel like they had to rush intimacy or prove commitment. They trusted the pace because it felt natural. Real connection doesn't need to be forced. It unfolds when both people feel secure enough to be themselves. They didn't leave because you were calm in conflict. They stayed because you didn't turn disagreements into battles. You didn't need to win. You wanted to understand. You knew that being right is less important than being kind. You took responsibility when you were wrong. You apologized without excuses. You created space for repair instead of resentment. That taught them that conflict doesn't have to mean abandonment. Your love felt calm because it wasn't conditional. You didn't threaten to leave every time things got uncomfortable. You didn't make affection dependent on behavior. You loved them through growth, not despite it. That kind of stability rewires people. It teaches them that love can be steady even when emotions fluctuate. It teaches them they don't have to earn care by suffering. They didn't stay because you fixed their life. They stayed because you supported them while they fixed it themselves. You believed in their strength even when they doubted it. You reminded them of who they were without trying to control who they became. You celebrated their progress, no matter how small. You understood that empowerment is one of the purest forms of love. You made love feel calm by being emotionally regulated. You didn't let every insecurity dictate your behavior. You communicated instead of assuming. You trusted instead of interrogating. You gave reassurance without being asked. That emotional maturity created a sense of peace that words alone can't explain. It's felt in the body. It's felt in the way tension dissolves in your presence. They didn't leave because your love lacked excitement. They stayed because it lacked fear. Fear is not passion. Anxiety is not chemistry. What people often call butterflies are just nervous systems reacting to unpredictability. You offered something deeper, peace. And peace allows love to grow roots. Deep roots don't shake easily. You didn't make them feel like they had to be on all the time. You allowed quiet. You allowed rest. You allowed space without punishment. You understood that connection doesn't disappear in silence. Sometimes, it deepens there. With you, they learned that love can exist without constant reassurance, because trust was already established. They didn't stay because you needed them. They stayed because you chose them. There's a difference. Need creates pressure. Choice creates freedom. You had your own life, your own sense of self, your own emotional foundation. You didn't expect them to complete you. You invited them to walk with you. That kind of love doesn't drain. It nourishes. Your calm love didn't trigger their survival mode. It didn't activate old patterns of chasing, proving, or self-abandonment. Instead, it invited presence. It invited honesty. It invited vulnerability without fear of punishment. In your love, they didn't shrink. They expanded. They didn't leave because you were gentle. They stayed because gentleness felt like respect. In a world that often glorifies hardness, your softness was revolutionary. You showed them that strength can be quiet, that commitment can be tender, that loyalty doesn't need to be loud to be real. You didn't make love feel calm by avoiding depth. You went deep, just without drowning. You talked about fears, dreams, wounds, and hopes with care. You didn't rush emotional intimacy before trust was built. You allowed layers to unfold naturally. That pacing made depth sustainable instead of overwhelming. They didn't stay because you promised forever. They stayed because you showed up today. And then you did it again tomorrow. And the day after that. Consistency is convincing. It builds belief without words. Over time, they stopped wondering if you would disappear. Your presence answered that question better than any promise ever could. You made love feel calm because you loved from wholeness, not hunger. You didn't ask them to save you. You didn't make them responsible for your happiness. You took care of yourself, and that allowed your love to be generous instead of demanding. That kind of love feels light, even when it's deep. They didn't leave because calm felt empty. They stayed because calm felt real. Real enough to build with. Real enough to grow in. Real enough to last. You showed them that love doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. It just has to be sincere, and even if one day they walk a different path, the truth remains. They didn't leave because your love was too calm. They stayed as long as they could because calm showed them what love was always supposed to feel like. Safe. Steady. Gentle. Alive, what you offered mattered. It still does. Calm love changes people. Even when they don't stay forever. It teaches them what to look for, what to accept, what to never settle for again. And that is not small. That is powerful. You didn't lose them by being peaceful. You honored yourself by loving the way your heart knows how. And that kind of love never disappears. It echoes. It heals. It leaves a mark that chaos never could, and if you ever wondered whether calm love is enough, whether it truly reaches the depths people claim they want, understand this: calm love is the kind that lingers long after the noise fades. It is the love people remember when they are tired of running. It is the love that revisits them in quiet moments, when they finally admit to themselves that peace felt better than the highs and lows they once chased. Your calm didn't mean the absence of emotion. It meant the presence of awareness. You felt deeply, you just didn't let feelings control you. You didn't turn love into a test of endurance. You didn't confuse attachment with devotion. You knew that loving someone should not cost you your sense of self. And by honoring yourself, you taught them how to honor you too. They stayed because your love didn't demand they become someone else. You didn't try to reshape them into a version that made you feel safer. You allowed them to unfold as they were. That kind of acceptance is rare. It tells someone, you are enough right now, not after you fix everything. And when people feel enough, they stop running from intimacy. You made love feel calm by trusting it. You trusted the connection enough to let it breathe. You didn't suffocate it with fear or cling to it with desperation. You understood that love grows best when it isn't constantly questioned. That trust created a foundation strong enough to hold uncertainty without collapsing. They didn't stay because you never struggled. They stayed because you handled struggle with grace. You didn't shut down when things got heavy. You didn't disappear when emotions became inconvenient. You leaned in. You talked. You stayed present even when it would have been easier to retreat. That presence made them feel less alone in their own inner storms. Your calm was not passive. It was intentional. It took strength to respond instead of react. It took courage to stay open instead of guarded. It took maturity to choose understanding over defensiveness. Calm love is not weak love. It is disciplined love. It is love that has learned from pain without becoming bitter. They stayed because with you, love didn't feel like a puzzle they had to solve. It felt like something they could step into fully. No mixed signals. No emotional whiplash. No wondering where they stood. Clarity is calming. And clarity is an act of care. You didn't romanticize suffering. You didn't believe that love had to be earned through pain. You showed them that joy and stability are not signs of shallow connection. They are signs of emotional safety. And safety allows intimacy to deepen without fear. they didn't leave because your love was gentle. They stayed because gentleness gave them permission to soften. Around you, they didn't have to be hypervigilant. They didn't have to anticipate disappointment. They didn't have to prepare for abandonment. Your calm presence told them, without words, you are safe here. You made love feel calm by being consistent in who you were. Your values didn't shift based on mood. Your affection didn't disappear when you were stressed. Your respect didn't fade during disagreement. That reliability built trust slowly, quietly, but powerfully. They stayed because your love didn't rush their healing. You understood that people carry histories you didn't create. You didn't take their triggers personally. You met their defenses with patience, not punishment. And over time, those defenses began to lower, not because you forced them to, but because they felt safe enough to try. You didn't love loudly for attention. You loved deeply in private. You knew that real connection doesn't need an audience. It needs sincerity. That sincerity created intimacy that didn't depend on validation from the outside world. They stayed because you didn't compete with their past. You didn't compare yourself to those who hurt them before. You let your actions speak. And slowly, your calm rewrote old narratives that told them love always comes with pain. You made love feel calm by being emotionally generous. You gave reassurance freely, not as a bargaining tool. You expressed appreciation without being prompted. You noticed effort and acknowledged it. Those small acts told them they were seen, not taken for granted. They didn't leave because you were secure. They stayed because your security didn't feel threatening. You didn't control. You didn't manipulate. You trusted. And that trust invited honesty instead of secrecy. You didn't turn love into a performance. You allowed authenticity. Bad days were allowed. Silence was allowed. Imperfection was allowed. That freedom made the connection sustainable. Love that requires constant performance eventually collapses. Love that allows rest endures. They stayed because with you, the future didn't feel like a source of anxiety. It felt like a possibility. You didn't pressure them with expectations they weren't ready for. You let commitment grow naturally, rooted in shared experience rather than fear of loss. You made love feel calm by being kind even when it wasn't convenient. You chose compassion during misunderstandings. You chose empathy during moments of distance. You chose connection over ego. Those choices accumulated into trust. They didn't leave because calm was unfamiliar. They stayed long enough to learn it. And even if they struggled at times, even if old patterns tried to resurface, your steady presence offered a different option. A healthier one. You didn't promise perfection. You promised effort. You promised honesty. You promised presence. And you delivered on those promises. That is what made your love believable. They stayed because your love didn't ask them to abandon themselves. It encouraged them to come home to themselves. And when someone feels more like themselves with you than without you, that is not something they forget easily. You made love feel calm because you understood that love is not about intensity, but about depth. Not about constant excitement, but about enduring connection. Not about possession, but about partnership, and if they ever questioned whether calm was enough, time answered that for them. Calm gave them clarity. Calm gave them stability. Calm gave them a glimpse of what love could be when it is healthy. You didn't love in a way that burned brightly and then disappeared. You loved in a way that warmed slowly and stayed. And even if the journey changes, that warmth remains part of them, because calm love doesn't fade. It integrates. It becomes a standard. A reference point. A quiet truth they carry forward. And that is why they didn't leave, and even now, when everything is quieter, when the story has settled into memory instead of daily reality, the calm you offered still exists. It lives in the way they pause before reacting. It lives in the way they recognize peace when they feel it again. Calm love leaves fingerprints on the soul. It teaches people how safety feels in their body, and once that lesson is learned, it cannot be unlearned. You may not always see the impact of loving this way. Calm love doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand credit. It doesn't leave behind dramatic endings or loud declarations. Its proof shows up later, in the choices people make, in the boundaries they hold, in the standards they refuse to lower. What you gave continues working long after the chapter ends. You didn't love to be unforgettable. You loved because it was honest. And honesty has a way of staying. Even if life pulls people in different directions, the memory of being treated with gentleness becomes a quiet compass. It points them away from chaos and back toward peace. There may be moments when you question yourself. Moments when the world tells you that love should be louder, faster, more consuming. Moments when you wonder if being calm means you were too much or not enough. Let this be clear, you were neither. You were aligned. You loved in a way that respected both hearts involved. That is not a flaw. That is wisdom. Calm love doesn't beg to be chosen. It simply exists, grounded and sincere. It allows others the freedom to choose it without pressure. And when they do, it's not because they're afraid to lose it, but because they recognize its value. Fear-based love binds. Calm love invites. You didn't lose anything by loving peacefully. You gained self-respect. You gained clarity. You gain the knowledge that you can love deeply without losing yourself. That is a gift many people spend their entire lives searching for. If someone ever walks away from calm love, it's not because calm was lacking. It's because they weren't ready to sit with themselves in the quiet. Calm brings awareness. It removes distractions. It asks people to face their inner world. Not everyone is ready for that. And that has nothing to do with your worth. You were not meant to be a lesson in endurance. You were meant to be a lesson in ease. In mutual respect. In steady affection. In love that doesn't need to wound to prove it's real, and when the right person meets your calm, they won't question it. They won't try to recreate chaos. They won't confuse peace with emptiness. They will recognize home when they feel it. They will know that love is not supposed to feel like a constant test. Until then, keep loving the way you do. Keep choosing presence over performance. Keep choosing clarity over confusion. Keep choosing gentleness without apology, because calm love is not the absence of passion. It is passion that feels safe. It is depth that doesn't drown. It is connection that doesn't cost you your peace. You didn't make love boring. You made it sustainable, and that is why, even if paths change, your love remains one of the most meaningful experiences someone can have.